Hi there, folks. Welcome to yesterday's news for November 12th, 2018. So today's story is one very tragic story with three important angles to look at. So the story is out of the Chicago area. And there was a security guard at a bar who was legally armed, who thwarted what appears to have been an attempted mass shooting that grew out of a dispute at the bar. And there were 4 people injured in the shooting. Our security guard, our good guy with a gun, managed to subdue the shooter and had him pinned to the ground and was holding him at gunpoint when the police arrived and shot him and killed him. So our hero ended up being the only person to die in this incident, and he died at the hands of the cop. So 3 important angles to discuss. First, I'm going to discuss the mainstream media's obsession with race that is, at this point, more than bordering on incitement. And then I'm going to talk about the hazards that we incur as armed civilians when we're dealing with police. And third, I would like to talk about the hazards of overly aggressive policing and the bad developments in what's going on culturally within police forces. So starting off with the horrible race-baiting behavior of the mainstream media. So 2 out of the 3 stories I have linked below spend way more time talking about the fact that our victim here was of African heritage than they do about the fact that he was a security guard, or the fact that he was wearing a security uniform, the fact that he was, licensed to carry, all this stuff. That's like little details. One of the stories, the New York Times story, doesn't even say whether or not he was legal. And all of them just keep hammering on his ethnicity and how many people of his color managed to have been killed by police this year. When it's like, way more than that have been killed by police. Like, this kind of thing happens to other color people too. And for some reason, but I'm not going to, I don't really care about the fairness. What I care about is the attempt to create racial division where there really isn't any, and make a racial dispute out of something that had nothing to do with race. This had everything to do with a blitheringly incompetent cop who was trigger happy and saw a guy with a gun and didn't bother to notice that he was wearing a freaking uniform and shot him. But at this point, I think this has been a trend for a while now, and it's kind of getting scary that the mainstream media has a profit motive to get a race war going. That would really drive up ratings, and they seem to be trying to get it going, bringing race into stories every time there's any kind of tragic story of conflict that ends poorly. All they can ever talk about is the race of the people involved, and they only ever talk about the ones where there is a racial disparity. And meanwhile, millions of not millions, but thousands of tragedies of similar magnitude occur where there isn't some sort of racial angle they can spin, and those people do not get justice because their stories disappear into the ether because they can't try to spin it into something that will make more stories. So I don't know what to do about that. I'm a free speech absolutist for the most part, but I do think that we may be getting to a point with this where it's going to start to count as incitement, or at the very least libel, and that we may have to start doing something about that. And I hate having to enforce laws like that against the media, but that's what they're doing. If they're inciting riots, then they need to be held accountable. second angle is the hazards we encounter as armed civilians when dealing with police. Now, 90% of police are totally cool with it. They're familiar with it. Depending on where you are in the country. I know in Chicago, this is probably less likely to be the case, but I know here in the South, like, odds are the cop you meet has friends who are civilians with concealed carry permits. So they're not going to be freaked out by it. They're going to kind of know how to handle it. They're going to know that there is such a thing as a good guy with a gun who's not wearing the same uniform as them. Now, in this case, there's nothing so far, no details have come out in this story where I can find anything that this guy could have done better. I guess he was wearing a freaking security guard's uniform. But there are obviously things that we can do to try and, be careful, always try to explain yourself. Keep your gun concealed as much as possible. I know if you're trying to hold a suspect at gunpoint, that's kind of hard to do, but, that may not always be the thing that you want to do, holding the suspect at gunpoint. If you are in that situation, try to stay alert, so that when you see the police coming, you can like wave to them and like wave them over, and then they know, oh, this is the guy who called, not the guy who was called about, that kind of thing. He shouldn't have had to do that because he was wearing a security guard's uniform, but still, that kind of thing that it's good to keep track of. And the truth is that this does happen a lot. And there was a story several years ago, again, right after, I think it was in the Chicago area. I'm not sure. The person who told me the story was in the Chicago area. But this was a guy at Home Depot with his kid, and somebody saw his gun and like freaked out and called the police, and the police like charged him and charged at him and tried to take his kid away, and like he wouldn't let them take the cart with the kid in it, and they shot him in front of his kid, but that didn't feed anybody's narrative, so that story disappeared into the ether. So it does happen a lot more than I'd like it to, and it is a little nerve-wracking because Philando Castile is still close in my memory. He did everything right too. The only thing you could kind of maybe point to with Philando Castile is try to have your ID out when the cop gets to your car, especially your carry permit. That way, whenever I've gotten pulled over, I hand them my carry permit and my driver's license without saying anything, and that kind of distracts them, and they don't have, they have to stop and look at it first, and then they have what they need, and they have an extra second to process, so they don't freak out like the police officer who shot Philando Castile did. So the third angle to take on this, is perhaps the most important, is the dangers of the trend that I'm seeing of sort of militarizing and making policing just very aggressive. I've got linked below a story that from shortly after the Illinois instituted concealed carry when they were forced to by the Supreme Court. The top cop in Chicago, I forget what his official title is, basically said he was going to tell his officers just to shoot anybody with a gun and, clean up the pieces later. That's very dangerous. So here's the thing. It's like this grows out of that trend where police forces are not behaving like public servants. They're behaving like an occupying army. And part of that, and it's like I'm not anti-war. I'm not anti-cop. But we've been fighting these wars where we, for better or for worse, we are an occupying army. Now, when America occupies your country, it's usually a good thing. Historically, I know we've kind of screwed up a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've screwed up other places too. But historically, that's generally we're not an oppressive occupying army, but we're still an occupying army when we're there, and those soldiers are coming home and becoming cops, and so they're kind of defaulting to that occupying army mentality where it's threat assessment and threat neutralization is the top priority rather than fostering peace. So there has been a shift in police tactics over the last 15 years that has become very much more militaristic, very much shoot first, ask questions later, very much anything that puts me at risk justifies me pulling my gun, and that's not okay. And things is more than just the revolving door with the military that's kind of feeding that is that we've got the war on drugs where we're trying to enforce silly laws to an extreme level and creating a war zone by you get organized crime. Well, okay, now you have an opposing army, and so now you need an army to oppose them. And the whole thing started because we decided to make stuff illegal that people want, and it created organized crime. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Other than it's not good, and we can't let our "Oorah, go America" patriotism blind us to the risks of a militarized police force. Because right now, most of the country we can shoot back if they get too bad, but that's one of the dominoes that has to fall before you get to a totalitarian regime, and I think we should be fighting to prevent that domino from falling as hard as we fight to preserve the right to keep and bear arms. As long as we can shoot back, it's, we have that line of defense, but I'd rather have both lines of defense in that the domestic police force is not a military force. They're not equipped to, be an occupying army and enforce unjust laws and have people able to fight back. I don't want to give up one of those and trust the other one to be able to solve the problem. So I think those of us in the Second Amendment community should be as skeptical and critical of police in this context as we can be. And, militarization of the police is as dangerous to our cause as gun control. And I think we need to do a better job of remembering that, at least on the right, in the Republican Party, etc. So, I'll try to follow up on this story as details come available, and we'll see you next time.